Welcome to The Currency of Grief, the podcast where we confront two of society's most taboo topics, death and money. My name is Justin Weidenfeld, and I'm here to serve as your grief financial officer, guiding you through the complex and emotional journey of what happens when money and mortality collide. Whether you're navigating the aftermath of losing a loved one, looking for practical advice on handling pre- and post-death planning, or simply just wanting to start those hard conversations about legacy while you still can, this space is for you. Together, we'll hear real-life stories from real-life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and come out the other side. Our guests will share their stories, practical insights, valuable advice, and moments of clarity so that none of you have to navigate this alone. I'm grateful you've decided to join us on this journey. Now let's dive in. All right, TCOG fam, today is a solo episode. We've covered a lot over the last 30 episodes, but today we're going to explain the key roles and responsibilities people take on during their grief and money intersection, or their intersection with the currency of grief. We're also going to dive into the emotional side of having this conversation either as a parent or grandparent with your heirs, or as a child with your parent and grandparents going back up the ladder. Our guests have shared how much of a gift being prepared is, how much of a gift clarity is across generations. So let's take that concept and put it into action. End-of-life planning are commonly referred to as estate planning. It's not just the paperwork. It's not just creating a will with an attorney or using an online application. It's not just the power of attorney document. You're creating a team with roles and responsibilities. The documents only serve as the instructions. With estate planning, I want you to think of it as if you're playing the role of a general manager on a sports team. You're drafting players who will fulfill your intentions and desired goals. The documents are the game plan that each player will follow. But without communicating that game plan appropriately, without planning ahead before the game, if you just get a document while you're out there on the field, you're probably going to get tackled by the other team. You may not hit the game-winning shot, or you may not be where you're supposed to be on the field. So let's talk about the core roles and the core players on your team. Or in the analogy that I'm using here, who's got ball and when? We're starting off with the medical power of attorney. I feel like there's like a slow clap coming. All right, at guard, your medical power of attorney. But we'll leave the announcer-ness to the professionals. I'm just a podcast host here. Medical power of attorney, also known as healthcare proxy or durable power of attorney for healthcare, designates a trusted person to make medical decisions on your behalf if you become incapacitated. It ensures your health wishes are followed, covers treatment options, and prevents family disputes. So this is the person in charge of making medical decisions on your behalf. This isn't necessarily your smartest child. This is the child or the person who's most grounded under pressure. This person may, at the end of your life, based on your wishes, decide, it's time to pull the plug. This person may decide, this treatment versus that treatment option based on, the pain that you as an individual may be in during that time. The characteristics of the medical power of attorney should be that they can tolerate ambiguity and grief simultaneously. Every day we live, we're one step closer to dying or one day closer to dying. And so this is someone who's okay with the thought around death and becoming less and less healthy. This is someone who will honor your wishes, even if they disagree with them. So they're going to put your wishes above their own. And someone who can communicate with doctors and family clearly. We've all been in those doctor's appointments and they say, I'm watching The Pit right now. So they say, oh, you have this, and this. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? So this is someone who needs to be able to understand what the doctors are saying and then communicate it with the rest of the family clearly. Moving on to your shooting guard. Just kidding. Your financial power of attorney, aka POA, is the trusted person or agent, as they sometimes call them, to manage your financial affairs, such as banking, investments, and real estate, either currently or if you become incapacitated. And I've said this word twice. So incapacitated really means deemed by a medical professional that you are no longer able to manage your affairs or make your own decisions because of a decline in health, or any other reason. The financial power of attorney ensures your finances are managed according to your wishes if you're unable to, or helps avoid, and the main overarching goal is to help avoid court-ordered guardianship or a court-appointed individual to manage your assets. There are multiple different types of powers of attorney, so I'll just go through them quickly. Durable remains in effect if you become mentally incapacitated. So durable power of attorney is a power of attorney that is in effect when you become mentally incapacitated. General power of attorney gives broad powers to manage most of the financial matters. So the difference between the two is durable can happen throughout life. So let's say I'm perfectly healthy. I just want, my brother to manage my finances for me. He'll step up in that durable power of attorney role, and I can, maybe I'm out of the country or something like that. General gives broad powers. Limited or special restricts the power of the agent's authority to specific tasks or times. So in that, limited power of attorney, let's say I'm out of the country and I want my brother to take care of, selling a house for me. I can give him limited power of attorney and restrict it to only the time that I'm out of the country. And then springing power of attorney, that individual, it becomes effective only upon a specific future event like incapacity. So I can only be incapacitated for my brother to take on that role as power of attorney for me. I want you to think about this as somebody who's not just good with money, but also good at making decisions under uncertainty. This is someone who should be calm with numbers and consequences, ethical under pressure, organized and proactive, and can communicate just like the medical power of attorney should be able to communicate with the doctors and understand what they're saying. The financial power of attorney should be able to communicate with financial institutions and speak the financial language. This isn't your wealthiest child who's a really good stock picker. This is someone who is calm enough to wait on hold for an hour just to close down an account, God forbid something were to happen. Next is the executor and personal representative. This role in the team carries out your wishes after death. So the legal title is a court-appointed fiduciary responsible for managing a deceased person's estate, including gathering assets, paying debt and taxes, and distributing property to beneficiaries according to the will or the state law. They must act in the estate's best interests, maintaining, valuing, and protecting the assets throughout probate. And so they are a fiduciary. They have to put the estate's interest above their own. And that is a legal role that they take on. So they are taking personal legal liability there. They'll also handle things like gathering documents, opening estate accounts, coordinating with attorneys. Think of this as your project manager of your legacy. After you die, this is the person who's going to be, first in line to see everything out and make sure your legacy is preserved. This person should be detail-oriented. They should be emotionally steady amid family dynamics, as we know here on the currency of grief. The intersection of grief and money causes tension in family dynamics. And so this person needs to be emotionally calm in communicating with all family members and all different types of family members. They should be willing to follow through over months. So a typical, probate lasts 9 to 12 months, depending on where you are. This isn't just, hey, let's plan a funeral and move on. This is someone that has the capacity to take on this role over months. And like I said earlier, the fiduciary standard, they must act with high standard of care and skill and caution, avoiding any type of self-dealing and managing assets like a prudent investor. So for example, let's say the gardener needs to get paid, and you pay them $100 out of your wallet, and you send yourself money back. Maybe you send yourself $200 out of the estate. That would be self-dealing. And so you have to be able to stay organized and avoid any type of self-dealing. So ideally, the executor and personal representative will have to, be in a decent financial situation to the point where like they're really carrying out your wishes and not necessarily, based on their own needs of managing money. The trustee and successor trustee. So legally, they are fiduciarily responsible for investing and distributing a trust assets for the beneficiary's sole benefit, strictly following the grantor's instructions. And we'll go over all those other roles in a second. This person, the trustee, manages assets for someone else over time. You can be the trustee of your own trust, or somebody else could be the trustee of your trust and make decisions over it. So I can be the trustee of my own trust, and if I were to die or if I were to become incapacitated, then my brother could be the successor trustee or the backup trustee over that trust. Their core duties include acting with loyalty and impartiality, keeping detailed records. Each trust has a tax return more likely than not. If it's a revocable trust under your tax ID number, it may be lumped in with your tax return, but there are further administrative burdens that come with managing a trust. And that person has to be able to communicate with beneficiaries for the future distributions. So let's say I'm the trustee for my brother, flipping it around a little bit, and my brother has $100,000 and he has a startup idea, and he has, he's like, hey, I really want to invest in a startup. As trustee, he's going to come to me and he's going to say, hey, I need the $100,000 or 50,000 of the 100 to invest in this startup. And I'm going to say, show me a business plan. Let's talk about it. What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the risks? What are the potential rewards? And so I have a duty to the account as trustee, to the loyalty, to the trust itself, because for the wishes of the grantor, the person who set up the trust. This isn't just about control. It's about judgment over time. Like I said in that business example, I need prudent judgment in order to make that decision on whether my brother should invest in this business or not. From a characteristics standpoint, you want that person to be patient, to be fair, and to be able to balance logic and empathy. So, maybe my brother wants to drop out of school. Is that logical? But I also have to be empathetic around, hey, he just went through a major loss. Maybe dropping out of school would be good for him. Let's talk about it. Let's take the time to do it. There are two sort of different types of people who take on this role. There's the individual trustee, which is what I'm alluding to. That's a family member, a friend, or another professional like an attorney. There are also corporate trustees, such as banks, like Northern Trust or Bessemer Trust. And those are often used for more complex estates to ensure impartiality. Those do come with a fee associated with a corporate trustee, but sometimes paying that annual fee is worth not appointing someone and putting somebody in a spot, like me being the trustee of my brother, so that the favoritism, hey, that Justin's the more responsible one, so his brother has to answer to him. That can create those complex family dynamics after death and loss. Before we continue, let's take a step back and talk about what even is a trust. A trust is a container for your assets. So think of it as a protective wrapper for your assets. The trust has instructions you've laid out about how those assets are handled and who they're for. So you have the grantor. The grantor is the creator, the giver, the person who puts the items into the trust, into the wrapper, into the protective wrapper. The trustee is the person managing it. And then the beneficiary is the person or people who the assets are meant to support. The goal of a trust is to give instructions when you can't. And so if I'm no longer here and my brother becomes the trustee of my trust, the trust language gives my brother instructions, a game plan of how those trusts, that money should be distributed. So maybe my trust is going to go to my brother and my stepsisters, the assets in my trust. And maybe it goes out at 30, 35, and 40 at specific ages. So my brother now has a game plan of how to distribute that trust to my family. It reduces chaos, delays, and court involvement. So one of the main goals of the trust and results of having a trust is that it keeps your affairs private, and there's a straightforward game plan of what to do. That's important. It's legally written down, signed, notarized, put into action. All right, this is the trust these are the instructions that we can use. And it allows you to be thoughtful, not just equal, but more personalized. So you can say, how and when you want somebody to receive your assets, not just who gets it. So maybe it's, hey, I want my brother to receive my assets, but after he graduates college, and I want it to stay in his name and not be commingled with a marriage or with any type of business that he starts. I want it to be just for his benefit, or even the benefit of his future kids, but not for his, future spouse. You can put those personalized instructions in the trust. And the last, maybe the center of your team, a guardian in estate planning is a court-appointed individual or institution tasked with caring for minor children or incapacitated adults if parents or primary caregivers pass away or become incapacitated. So God forbid, let's say, my future spouse and I pass away, I would name a guardian for my child to live with somebody who would take them in and care for them and provide for them. They are the person responsible for making personal decisions regarding healthcare, education, and general welfare, ensuring the child's safety and well-being. This guardian is usually named within the will, and the goal by naming a guardian is to prevent court intervention. These are my wishes. I want my child to go live with my brother. And people can object to that stipulation, but if it's written in the document, signed into action, it's really hard for that to change over time. The characteristics of this person, obviously, this is a very emotional decision. And so most people think both logically and emotionally about this, but this is super emotional to think about, what if parents were not, no longer here to take care of their child. And so this person, this guardian, should be someone who shares your same values, not just your lifestyle, but has the same values that you would want to see in your kids. Somebody who loves your children in a way that feels like continuity, not just a replacement for you, but someone who's going to continue what you started as a parent. And someone who has the capacity to house and care for your kids. if my brother was living in a 1 bedroom and, making $5,000 a year, he doesn't really have the capacity to care for my child. But if he's living in a 2 bedroom house with a spouse or something like that, and he has other kids, maybe that type of environment would be better suited for him. So these are things you all have to take into consideration when naming a guardian. Here's the truth. The person closest to you is not always the best person suited for a specific role. You want to choose, you're eventually going to have to choose one person over another, unless you only have one person in your life that could be named any of these roles. This could be perceived as favoritism. My parents didn't love me as much as my sibling because they chose my sibling to be the trustee and the executor. My parents didn't trust me because they named, a corporate trustee as the trustee instead of me. Naming a professional instead of family, that has its own challenges and also potentially rewards. It gives your family sometimes time to grieve and time to feel all the feelings in the midst of really challenging decisions, lifestyle changes, the absence of a specific person. And so maybe it could be a good thing, but like I said earlier, it does come with costs, fees, and that feeling of, did my parents not trust me? Did this individual not trust me? Now I have to wait for this person who I have no relationship with to tell me where and when and how I can use the funds that I inherited, or what we're going to do with grandma's house or mom's house. These decisions is where grief and maybe guilt begins, even before loss happens. And so as someone's declining and, there's one person in charge, this is where those really complex feelings come into play. And it's just the fact of it. Not everything will be fair and equal, and it probably shouldn't be. There's probably a reason why this person gets a little bit more money than this person, or a reason that the medical power of attorney is my, nurse stepsister versus, my brother who's in college. Like, everything should have a reason, and it's likely not going to be fair and equal. You just have to, as a heir, you just have to control the controllables. I do want to bring up some potential pitfalls in choosing, being the general manager of your team. Naming co-executors because, that's the fairest thing to do. I don't want to choose between my kids. In reality, what you're doing is every decision now requires agreement from both parties. That translates into delays in the signing of documents, selling property, and making distributions, increased risk of conflict. So maybe because my brother and I were co-executors in my dad's estate, this isn't actually factual, but if we were, maybe he would want one thing and I would want another. And then now we're working together in a really tumultuous relationship. And as we know, grief brings that out even more to the forefront. The executor is responsible for coordinating everything: documents, accountants, taxes, professionals. Now imagine that multiplied across multiple people. Now there's 2 people, there's more cooks in the kitchen, as they say. So do you want to have one person making all the decisions, or do you want to have multiple cooks in the kitchen making decisions for you? And do those multiple cooks align on everything, or are they going to be, butting heads? The emotional truth: you try to preserve harmony, but by choosing co-executors, you may have introduced friction. What you could potentially do is name others as backups or assign specific roles, not shared authority, or have a conversation and ensure both are working together. So in my brother and my scenario, let's say my dad would have had a conversation. Hey, I'm choosing Justin because he's older, But Jake, you are the backup to Justin. If anything happened to him, if he wasn't able to do it, if he needed support, your job is to support him in this role. That makes me feel empowered as the executor, but it also makes my brother feel empowered because he has a specific role in this. Or if they wanted us to work together, that's the reason that we should be having a conversation as to what the roles are, what the wishes and desires are that, maybe in this case, my dad would have had in his estate plan. Another pitfall is not considering how people work together. They'll figure it out. I won't be here, so it doesn't really matter. Wrong. Different communication styles and different sibling dynamics are really pronounced here. So one may be decisive and one may be analytical. That's going to cause delays in the decision-making process and probably a lot of friction between the siblings. Maybe one's more emotional and one's detached. What should we do with dad's car? Oh, I want to keep it. Like, that's super important, blah, blah, blah. Or now let's get rid of it. I'm dropping it off at the dealership today. We don't need it. That's a waste of money. That's a means for conflict. Grief is super emotional. Loss is incredibly impactful. And by just throwing things away without any type of empathy, being super detached and not wanting to, not understanding what that may mean to that person is a conflict waiting to happen. But vice versa, by holding on to things too long and not being able to make a decision, trying to keep everything, that's not efficient, that's not effective, and you're just going to end up with a garage full of stuff that piles up over the years. So back to the GM analogy, you're designing a team. You have to have the right people in the right seats with the right personality traits, or else it's just going to blow up. Choosing the closest person instead of the right person. Oh, they're my spouse, they're my oldest child, they're my sibling. It makes sense to choose them, right? But proximity doesn't equal capability. If let's say my grandmother, who was 85 years old when she passed away, chose her spouse to be her executor. Well, her spouse had early onset dementia. That wouldn't have worked out. She wouldn't have been able to she didn't have the capacity, although she lived with her, she didn't have the capacity to take on that role and that responsibility. So proximity doesn't equal capability. Emotional closeness doesn't equal decision-making ability. Another example is, oh, I'm going to choose my oldest child as the executor, but my oldest child is disorganized or gets frustrated with numerous tasks. I'm going to choose my spouse as my medical power of attorney, but they're unable to make medical end-of-life decisions because they loved me so much. They love me so much that they can't let me go. Another pitfall is overloading one person with every single role. I trust them the most. So I'm going to make them the financial power of attorney, the medical power of attorney, the executor, the trustee, the guardian. And that is a means for burnout. These roles are exhausting physically, mentally, emotionally, and they take a lot out of your life. That one person would have to carry all of the emotional and logistical weight. Each role has distinct responsibilities, from healthcare decisions to managing assets to closing the estate. And what may be a good fit for one person may not be for another. I begged my grandmother, I was saying, hey, the medical decisions, that's really not my specialization. She needed me anyway. And, it was exhausting watching her go through hospice and making those decisions on her behalf. Vice versa from the point before this, ignoring geography and life stage. Proximity isn't the only important factor, but it is an important factor. If that person lives across the country, they're going to have to fly in every single time to maybe sell your house or whatever it might be. Maybe they have young children and they want to be at their children's soccer games or baseball games. They may not have the capacity to take on these roles. Maybe they have a demanding career that requires them to work 12 hours a day. And they're at the peak of their career and they're selling a business, they own a business. That person may not have the physical time capacity to take on this role, even if you've asked them to. Maybe they lack the ability when the timing matters. And maybe executors who can't physically access the property or the document. So, like I said, living across the country or living in a different country. And lastly, a guardian who really isn't realistically able to take on children, especially after losing someone and not being able to talk it out. That's really hard because that person probably feels a lot of guilt of not being able to realistically take on the kids. But you have to do what's best for them and the kids, and people have to secure their own mass before being able to help others. They don't have the capacity to take it on. They're not in the right life stage, or they're not in the right location. I would go back to the drawing board. Not updating these roles as life changes. Oh, I did this. My will and my powers of attorney, I did them 20 years ago in 2006. Well, in 2006, I had different relationships with different people. People have grown up. People have gotten older. Capacity changes. People pass away. They move. They evolve. I've even seen people have deceased spouses or the brother that they had a falling out with or kids that they don't speak to anymore taking on these roles in their estate plans. You want to keep these updated and revisit them, I would say, every 3 to 5 years. An outdated plan is just a well-documented risk. I'll leave you with that one on that one. Failing to prepare the people you choose. This is where we're going to spend the bulk of our remaining time. If the first time they're seeing your wishes is after you're gone, all they have is that document, that game plan, and if you're gone, they don't have the ability to ask questions. They may not even know where your documents are, and that's not the first thing you want somebody to do after you're no longer there, is be searching through your things to try to find the documents. They don't know your wishes, your desires, or your intentions. They don't know how to work with family members on these decisions. They're in the midst of grief at the worst time of their life, and all of a sudden, they're the head coach of this team as the executor. And how do I work with my brother who's lives in a different state and is at a different stage of life to make decisions on my dad or my mom's stuff? Everybody who's in this role, unless they're a corporate trustee, is navigating grief and confusion simultaneously. There are dozens of steps, death certificates, financial accounts, legal filings, tax returns. On top of the emotional side, it's overwhelming. So clarity now is a gift to them later. Before we dive into how to have this conversation, as Simon Sinek says, say that 10 times fast. Simon Sinek, I can't even do it. Before we dive into that, let's talk about why we avoid this conversation, why we don't talk about it. Most people don't avoid having the conversation as to who's playing what role because they're irresponsible. They avoid it because it asks something really emotionally difficult from us. It forces us to confront our own mortality or our own loss of control and independence. You go from being a child where you're relying on your parents for food, everything, transportation. Then you live a life that's completely independent. And then you go back to needing help again. That's a really tough transition. And you never know when it's going to hit. There's not like by 84, we're all going to need the help of our children. No, that maybe there's a book for babies, but there's not a book for getting older, at specific ages, what people need. It also requires choosing between people and putting that choice into the world while potentially hurting the feelings of people you love. Avoided conflict doesn't disappear. It just gets transferred to a more emotional moment. So by not having this conversation, you're just transferring the conflict to later. People think, I don't want to burden the people I love with this information. If I don't bring it up, I don't have to put that weight on them. But what actually happens is the burden doesn't disappear. It just arrives later, unexplained and heavier after loss. In reality, managing an estate involves legal, financial, and logistical complexity over months at the worst possible time. Removing the preparation doesn't remove the burden. Let's assume it'll work out. Sorry, why we don't have this conversation. Oh, it'll work out. I won't be around, so it doesn't matter. My kids will figure it out. Everything's pretty straightforward. My estate's not that complex. But there are multiple roles, dozens of documents, dozens of steps after death. What feels simple now becomes complicated under that pressure and under the grief. And the last one is I haven't fully thought this through or processed it myself. It's really hard to explain a plan if I'm unsure of my own wishes or I haven't decided who fits what role. They don't have a plan. It's really hard to communicate that plan. There's a reason that they're putting it off too. I don't want to share too much. Keeping things private doesn't keep things safe. Instead, keeping things private creates confusion, extra costs, and likely conflict at the exact moment when clarity is needed the most. And lastly, I just don't know where to start. Well, that's where we're starting today. If you've been avoiding this conversation, it doesn't mean you're unprepared. It means you're human. But being human doesn't remove the responsibility that you have to prepare your heirs and that your heirs will have when you need them the most. So let's dive into how to have this emotionally challenging conversation. Pause for water break and a deep breath. Okay. Estate planning conversations don't fail because people don't care. They fail because people don't know how to begin. My perspective isn't of somebody who's I'm 29 years old. I've never gone through personally incapacitation or death of myself, obviously. My perspective is somebody who's been thrusted into the role twice before the age of 30. And so I'm the heir. I am the person who's taken on all of these roles for my dad and my grandfather. So that's my perspective. Let's start with the matriarch and patriarch having an estate conversation, an estate wishes conversation with their heirs. I call these the, who, what, where, when, why, and how of estate planning. Start small with who. This is a series of conversations. Your goal isn't to solve everything at once. The first conversation should be you and the person you're asking to take on the role. The later conversations, you can include your whole team, other children, beneficiaries, and other key roles if necessary. Now, where should this conversation take place? The ideal environments, someplace private, calm. There's not a time pressure. Oh, we have to be out of here in an hour and a half. In an emotionally neutral setting. A good example is at home after dinner, away from the rest of the family, on a walk or a quiet coffee conversation, maybe not in public. Avoid any type of high stress or emotionally charged moments. For example, after maybe an older person fell and broke their arm. It's not life threatening, but they're in a hospital. Hey, by the way, you're my financial power of attorney too. Or holiday gatherings. Those are emotionally charged settings. The key here is the setting sets the tone before you even say a single word. If you're in a stressful environment, that's going to cause for a stressful conversation. If you're in a calm environment, it'll be a calmer conversation. When do you have this conversation? The honest answer is the earlier than it feels necessary and before it feels urgent. The best timing after documents are drafted, but not years later, during a calm season of life, and when you can be thoughtful and not reactive. So not when you're in the hospital or, have just fallen, ideally, at home before something like that happens. Don't wait until you have an illness or wait until a crisis or wait until everything's perfect, because that doesn't exist. If it feels slightly early, it's probably the right time. What are you actually talking about? What am I even going to say? What are we even talking about? This is where most people get overwhelmed. They think they need to explain everything. You don't. People don't need all of the information. They just need the relevant information. So let's break this out into 3 layers. The roles. You could say, here's how I've structured things. Here's what the responsibility entails. You can use the exact words that I said earlier in this podcast. The why. This is the part people skip, and the part I believe prevents future conflict. I chose you for this role because your temperament is very calming, because I really trust your judgment, because your ability to make decisions under pressure is powerful. These are empowering statements. The why is empowering behind the role. And then the wishes. Let's use healthcare preferences as an example. I wish to be cremated like my mom and dad. I wish to get care at home versus being put in a nursing home, no matter how much it costs. That's really what you're discussing. If we're talking about values and values around money and family and legacy, I want the money that I've accumulated to eventually flow to my grandkids. That's why I've put guardrails in my planning. Any gray area in your plans, give guidance. Allow the person to ask questions at that time. And if you don't know the answer, you can get your professional or your team involved, the people who maybe drafted the documents, your financial planner. How do I have this conversation? How do I actually say it? This is really freaking hard. So let's break it up into a couple different steps. Open it gently. I've been working on getting things organized, not because anything is wrong, but because I want to make sure things are easier on the people I love. Now give context before the ask. I've learned that estate planning isn't just about documents. It's about choosing the right people for the right roles. Then make the ask. There's a role I'd really like you to consider, but I want you to feel completely comfortable saying yes or no. And then explain why. I chose you to be my financial power of attorney because you stay calm in hard situations and you think clearly under pressure. Step 5, define the role. Don't overwhelm them, just translate it. This would mean stepping in to handle financial decisions if I couldn't. Things like bills, my accounts, and making sure everything keeps running appropriately. Instead of legal jargon or financial jargon like durable power of attorney, or keeping it simple. Then create space for a response. How does that feel to you? Pause. Let them process that. And offer an exit. This is really the step that builds trust. If it doesn't feel right, that's completely okay. I'd rather have the right person in that spot. I'd rather have the right fit than force you into a role that you're not ready for or that may not be right for you. These conversations aren't really about death. They're about trust, preparedness, spoken out loud. After the initial talk, there are a number of things that you can do to keep the conversation going. Share where documents are located. You can introduce them to your professionals if needed, like the attorney or the advisor. You can revisit this over time. You can ask them questions to get them comfortable. What else do you need to know to feel comfortable in this role? How do you want to revisit this over time? Would it be okay if we check in on this next year to make sure you still have the desire and capacity to take on this role if, God forbid, something happened? If you're open to it, I'd like to bring up 1 to 2 specific wishes that I've thought about. You're asking for permission to bring these up. So as, a couple things you could say with those wishes is, thank you for agreeing to take on this medical power of attorney role. One thing I want you to know is that no matter what, I want to be cared for in our home, no matter how much it costs. Also, when the time comes, hopefully not for a while, it's important to me that your mom and I are buried together. We have but we don't have plots yet. Then pause. Let them react. Let them answer. Don't, as I say, overexplain. And don't overwhelm them with documents. Let's say you do have plots. You don't have to say like, hey, here are all my plots. The documents create an emotional and more intellectual thought. You want this to be as conversational as possible. So that was a lot. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to go up the ladder. So let's say I'm a child or even a grandchild, and I want to ask my parent or grandparent that I'm worried about, whether I'm going to be put in a challenging situation down the road. How do I bring this up with my parents or grandparents? What do I say? How should I say it? Where should this conversation happen? Why is it important for us to even have this conversation? So before you speak, if you lead with fear, like, do they even have a plan? Am I the executor? What if something happens and I'm unprepared? It can feel like you're rushing them. You're talking about their death that they're not ready to confront yet, or you're trying to take control too soon. Reframe this and maybe say it, point it out specifically. I'm not trying to control the outcome. I'm trying to reduce confusion and stress for all of us. So who really should be in this conversation? Ideally, this is a one-on-one conversation with the person you're concerned about first. So maybe it's me and my grandmother. Where should you have this conversation? Someplace low pressure, comfortable, familiar, private. My grandmother and I actually had this conversation on her couch. Try not to ambush her with other relatives. Unfortunately, we made that mistake because the situation became urgent and we weren't getting any answers. The goal is safety, not urgency. Before it becomes urgent or too late, you want to have this conversation before you need to try to ambush or overpower or rush this conversation. When do I bring it up? If you're waiting for the perfect time, it doesn't exist. After, you may want to bring it up after helping that person with some paperwork. Maybe we just filed our taxes and, you needed to help them download something. Maybe you can say, hey, by the way, I've been thinking about this. I was worried about this. What's my role in your estate plan? Maybe after a friend or an extended family member passes away. That could be the impetus for this conversation, the catalyst for it. When financial or medical topics come up organically. Oh, I had a doctor and they found something on my back. Oh, by the way, I was thinking, do you have a medical power of attorney? I just want to know who it is to make sure that you're prepared. And maybe even after listening to this podcast, blame me. Oh, my grief financial officer, Justin, from the Currency of Grief. He told me that I need to have this conversation with you. Are you okay if we spend a couple minutes talking about this? So why does this conversation even matter? As we've been talking about this entire podcast, the goal of these conversations happening before a stressful time is to reduce future stress during that stressful time. There are dozens of steps after death that happen. And the last thing you want to be doing is understanding, who the team is, what role everybody's in. You want to have those roles so that you can hop into action when needed and grieve when not needed. Without clarity, those decisions happen under the pressure and grief. It prevents family conflict. When people don't know the plan, I may create my own versions of what I think that person's wishes were in my head, and that may be different from my siblings or my spouse. So for my grandmother, I didn't know her wishes. I tried to move her into a nursing home. Other family members got upset with that. Other family members thought it needed to happen. But my grandmother's wishes were to die and have care at home. You want to honor their wishes. So what you could say here is, I want to be able to honor your wishes no matter what, and honor your legacy always. But I can't do that if I don't know what your wishes are. And lastly, it protects you. If I'm going to be involved in any way, I want to be prepared. I want to be prepared so I can do the job as well as possible. This is protecting me. Like we said, there's legal and fiduciary duties with a lot of these roles. Here are some key pitfalls that people fall into when starting this conversation up the ladder. Don't come in too strong to the point where it feels like a takeover. Don't make it about make it about the logistics. Don't make it about them dying. After you die, I want to know what to do with your car. No, I wouldn't say that, because, then they're thinking about them dying. Hey, Mom, what do you want? What do you think you would want to do with the car long term? Do you want to hold this car forever? Do you want me to have this car eventually down the road? What do you want to happen? Even taking on the responsibility and making it about you. I want to make sure, what you can say is, I want to make sure I'm up for any role you put me in. And last key pitfall is asking everything at once. This is the door to open the conversation. This isn't, get all the answers as fast as possible. So how do we actually initiate the conversation? We're going to go step by step here. You want to lead with your feelings, not their mortality, as we just discussed. So here's how I would start it out. I've been thinking about something lately, and I realize I don't actually know what your plans are, or how I'd help if something unexpected happened. This keeps it grounded in your uncertainty and not their death. Make it about support, not control. I'm not trying to change anything. I just want to make sure I won't be unprepared in a stressful moment. And then give them an easy way out. If now's not a good time to talk about it, that's okay. We can definitely come back to it. And ask simple, not threatening questions if they want to continue the conversation. Start small. Don't go straight into roles. Maybe you say, do you have somebody listed to help with medical decisions if needed? Is there a plan for who handles things financially? Would you want me involved in any of that? Here's a script that you can use to help navigate this conversation. Can I ask you something a little personal? Yeah, sure. What is it? I've been thinking about something lately. I realize I don't actually know what your plans are or how I'd help if something unexpected happened. I'm not trying to change anything. I just want to understand what's in place so I can support it. And most importantly, if I'm going to be involved in any way, I want to be prepared so I can do it well. I want to be able to honor your wishes and your legacy always. I can't do that if I don't know what the plans are. Then pause. Let them reply. If now's not a good time to talk about it, that's okay. We can come back to it. Now, what pushback would you get to that opening of the conversation? They can say, yeah, I'm cooking Thanksgiving dinner. Now is not a good time. Okay, of course. I respect that. I also believe this is a really important conversation for us to have, and so, when it feels right for you, obviously. So when would be a better time for us to have this conversation? You're not just dropping it with an ambiguous future. You're actually having that person indicate when they're ready and when they can put a date on the calendar to have this conversation. Maybe they'll say, that's really none of your business. What I would say is, I understand why it may feel that way. You're validating their emotions. I'm not trying to step into anything that's yours to decide. I think where I'm coming from is I don't want to be in a position where something happens and I'm trying to figure things out without any direction. Even just knowing whether there is a plan and who I should call would give me a lot of clarity and peace of mind. Oh, I haven't done any of that planning. What you could say to that is, that's actually really common. I think a lot of people put it off because it's a lot. I'm not expecting you to have everything figured out. I just want to make sure if something unexpected happens, we wouldn't be starting at zero. So can I help in any way? We can start small and take it at your pace. And then you can maybe ask, who would you want to be involved in this plan if something were to happen? They could say, I don't know, my husband knows it all. This is very common in females of a certain demographic. What I would say to this is, that makes sense. I'm glad one of you has a handle on it. I think my only concern is if something happened where they weren't able to step in, I wouldn't know where to start. Would it be possible for me to at least know who I'd reach out to or where key items are, just in case? And maybe you can have a conversation with, their husband, that individual. So from a framework standpoint, when you get pushback, don't push harder. Shift your position. Shift it from control to curiosity, from urgency to steadiness and calmness. It's from I need answers right now to I want to be prepared to support you and your wishes. I'm not trying to take over. I just want to make sure I won't be guessing. I'm not trying to change anything. I just want to understand what's in place. The goal isn't to win the conversation. It's to open the door and keep the door open to future conversations. In closing, estate planning isn't just about paperwork. It's about people, trust, and the conversations we often avoid. This episode walks through how to choose the right roles, navigate difficult dynamics, and have meaningful conversations that reduce future stress and conflict. Because clarity today is one of the greatest gifts you can leave behind. If this episode sparked something for you, whether you've had this end-of-life planning conversation or you're still figuring out how to start it, I'd love to hear from you. Please email me at thecurrencyofgrief@gmail.com. These aren't easy conversations, but they matter more than we think. And sometimes just knowing you're not alone is where it begins. That's what the currency of grief is all about. Podcast family, it's a great day to have a great day. So go have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Currency of Grief podcast. My hope is that today's conversation brought you clarity, comfort, and even a spark to start those difficult but necessary conversations in your own life. If you found this episode helpful, it would mean the world to me if you would share it with one other person who you feel this podcast could impact. And please, take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. Your review will help us reach more people who need this resource. Remember, the best time to talk about death and money was yesterday. The second best time is now. Until next time, I'm Justin Weidenfeld, your Grief Financial Officer, and this has been the Currency of Grief podcast.